Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie. Patriots Against CPS Corruption invites you to attend our March for Texas Children. DFPS has failed the families of Texas. The Texas Special Committee on DFPS has also failed to hear the parents and the children. Time to make our voices heard and surround yourself with those on the same mission as you. Join us on the March for Our Children, September 21st, 2022, starting at 1 p.m. at 701 West 51st Street, Austin, Texas, 78751. Also, Family Forward Project has two rallies on August 22nd, Jefferson City, Missouri, and August 29th, Springfield, Illinois. And more can be found on the Family Forward Project on Facebook. Get more involved politically, and let's keep moving this nation forward in the right direction. I am bringing back on Connie Reguli. She was last on season 2, episode 98, season 3, episode 63, and season 3, episode 77. And what has happened is she has just been a valiant warrior and an attorney for over 30 years. And somehow she stirred the pot the wrong way so far. And they came after her with criminal charges when she was defending a client. And since then, the state has now made another indictment of aggravated perjury because they couldn't come up with anything else. I welcome you to the show, Attorney Connie Reguli. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Well, here I am again. I'm now infamous, I guess, instead of famous, but such is life. That's what happened when we start kicking the bundles of bees and they start scattering all over the place. Then all of a sudden they get wild, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think the last time I was with you was in July. And gosh, I want to tell people, I want them to know that for really about 3 years, although I've been very active, people have seen me in different places. They've seen me do live videos about other families, other stories. The things that have happened to me and the manipulations that they've done to me, I've actually been very quiet on because, one of them was part of it was criminal, where there was going to be a jury trial. And, they love to track my Facebook and they love to see what I'm doing. And so I know that they would try to say something like I was trying to taint a jury because they're just that crazy. Of course, it's like, I have 9,000 followers, not 900,000 followers. I mean, I'm not like on CNN or MSNBC or even Fox or anything. I'm like on my little YouTube, just me, right? And the people that I know and love. So I stayed pretty quiet about it. I didn't talk a lot about what had happened and what the judge had done to manipulate the law. However, after the trial in April, of course, they used that trial to ruin the judicial election and to get me kicked totally out, basically. And then also, I knew that, and they used it to get all of the local media to write bad press on me. And so then I had to face a sentencing hearing and I had to face a motion for a new trial, which those were pushed off like another 3 or 4 months. So I had just said to myself, I was going to keep that fairly low key. I wasn't really going to just like chatter about it. But then over the last month or so, I have been telling people, look, this part of the process is almost over. I'm almost out of the trial court and going to the appellate court. So I'm going to lay it out for you. And I have laid it out. I've done it a couple times. And just it's important for your audience to know that the judge changed the law. He changed the language of the law in the jury instructions so that the jury could indict my client and then thusly indict me. So it will be a challenge. The case, my client's case, Wendy's case, is now going to the Criminal Court of Appeals, and they're in the briefing schedule. I hope I've helped kind of draft those arguments. I hope her attorney does a good job and really explains that and puts that out there, because the next step is that the Attorney General will now get the case. And so the Attorney General represents the state in any criminal action. And they are the ones who are going to have to stand up and support what the judge did, which was changing the law. The judge actually wrote an order. This is Judge Joseph Woodruff, actually wrote an order that said that if you apply the statute as we have argued, that it would not apply to these ex parte DCS removal orders. And I say you're exactly right. It does not apply to those, because the statute was written very specifically for enforcement of visitation orders. So, he had to change all of that. He had to put it before the jury as it's just a violation of a court order. So therefore it's, then I argued the order wasn't any good. They made legal rulings on that. The jury didn't decide on that. The court did. And of course they were trying to protect the state actors. The CPS worker, Deandra Miller, made false impression statements 16 times during my client's case. I mean, everything from saying on their very first encounter that she didn't tell her she had an attorney, which she did. Saying that she told the mother, Wendy, that she could come to a meeting and bring her attorney, which she did not. She lied and said that she had called everybody she could think of for a placement for the children. And she'd called one person. I mean, she said that there was a glass door, and there was not. It was a wooden door. I mean, it was like, she said that my client yelled at her and screamed at her, and she turned and walked away. My client never yelled at her. I mean, she did all of that to create a false impression to the jury that my client was being rude and aggressive, and she absolutely was not. She told her she had an attorney. She said, my attorney, the whole thing came up because her son made a Facebook post that he made an allegation that his mom gave him drugs. He was mad at her. He wanted to get back at her. And that's what got this all started. So my client goes through this whole criminal case. I go through this whole criminal case, and then I have to have a sentencing hearing. All right. So the sentencing hearing is in June. All right. This is also a really bit of fun, juicy information. So if anybody has ever seen court TV or anything like that, a sentencing hearing is basically for victim impact statements. It's for the victim of the crime to come forward and say, I was so injured. I was so hurt. I mean, somebody in my family was murdered as a result of this. We've lost a family member. We've lost money. They're victim impact statements. They had no victim. Okay. They had no victim. And so the DA, the true victims were my clients who had to go through this system, children who were wrongfully removed. Okay. It's horrible. And so they put on the DCS attorney who whines and cries that we filed a federal lawsuit against her. It ultimately got dismissed, but we brought up all these arguments about ex parte orders. And then the Brentwood police detective, Lori Russ. Okay, this is the most hilarious part. Lori Russ in 2018 sought a search warrant. That search warrant was signed by the very same Judge Joseph Woodruff, that manipulated the law. So to change the law and change the jury instructions, removing language from the statute. He's the same one who signed the search warrant. And so she says in this search warrant, she goes for all of my Facebook for almost 6 months, from August through December. She wants every private message, every post, every comment, every IP address, every email, every phone number, everything, right, in my Facebook. Now, at the time I was practicing law, I would sometimes communicate with my clients through Messenger if they, were having trouble getting a hold of me or whatever. Sometimes they just went right to Messenger. And so there were private communications in there, not just with potential clients, but families all over the country who were sharing with me the horror stories of what had happened to them, who had reached out to me personally and privately. This
Even
is
myself.
so horrible. It's so horrible that they did this. And so she says in her search warrant that my privacy settings prevent her from seeing it. Okay, so she admits that I have a private Facebook. And then she says in her search warrant that the reason she needs it is to reconstruct or investigate the events that led up to the crime. That's her language, okay? They get 20,000 pages of Facebook. They don't use a single page in my trial, not page one in my trial. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe she has a colorful reason there for the search warrant. She comes to the sentencing hearing and the district attorney asks her why she got my Facebook. And she says, because Miss Reguli was saying bad things about me and the Brentwood Police Department. And I wanted to know what else she was saying.
Oh,
She got my Facebook to find out what I was saying. And then she said, she goes, if you Google my name, meaning her name, Lori, if you Google my name, Lori Ross, you get all of these bad things that Connie Reguli has said about me. Now, I tested that. It's absolutely not true. I am not that famous. And even if I was, it's like, you're a public servant. You're a public servant. I can say anything I want about you as long as I don't make, allege that you did a specific crime or, make some very specific factual thing that's false. I can say, I think you stink. I can say, I think you violated the law. I can say all of those things. You're a public servant. And people need to be talking about their public servants. And I encourage that. So we get in this hearing and the DA asked the judge for 2 years probation and a weekend in jail. Now she's like, she wants Miss Reguli to understand how serious it is, blah, blah, blah. Now this judge who changed the law, he actually jumped out of the case in February and they stuck another judge in there at the last minute. But the judge who recused himself sat in the back of the courtroom in line of sight of the judge and watched the trial. Watch the trial. In my sentencing hearing, he came in the courtroom and sat in the back of the courtroom in direct line of sight of the judge after he had recused himself for cause. Like, why would you even do that? Right? Why would you do that unless you had a mission and you were trying to convey a message? So
sounds familiar.
Yeah, so the judge who's hearing my sentencing hearing takes a break. I don't know if he talked to the other judge or not, but I'm just saying it sure was suspicious, right? And so he comes back out and he basically says, anybody has a right of civil disobedience, but you have to pay the price. And then he says that everybody has a First Amendment right, but then he says it kind of gets all wanky the way he's talking about it. And then he says, I don't think a weekend is enough. I'm going to sentence her to 30 days in jail. Now we're going like, what? I mean, even the DA didn't ask for that. He just invented that all on his own. I mean, that is so bizarre. That is rarely do they do more than what the DA wants. Typically, when a DA comes in on a felony and wants, 2 years in jail, the judge usually does less than what the DA wants, right? They don't do more than what the DA is asking for. And so 30 days. So my attorney and I kind of look at each other and, he asks the judge if there's some timers on that. And the judge goes, oh yeah, she can stay on bond. I know there's going to be an appeal. She can stay on bond. So here I am walking around on ROR bond all this time, right? All this time. So then I do the motion for the new trial. We have that the August the 3rd. We lay out all these arguments that we're going to bring up on appeal, including changing the jury instructions to remove an essential element, totally rewording the statute. And, the new judge has to own it now because his name will be on the appeal, not Judge Woodruff. It'll be Judge Akery. So he has to own it, but he decided to own it. And but he did also still just leave me on bond. So I'm still ROR. So that was August the 3rd. So here we are the 15th on a Monday. Last Thursday, I get a call from my attorney and he's like, Connie, he goes, you're not going to believe this. The DA did another indictment on you. And
Oh.
I'm like, what? And he goes, yeah, the sheriff's department called. They want you to go turn yourself in. I'm like, okay, all right, well, I will. I'm not going to have them like chasing me down, trying to hunt me down. So I went down there Friday morning. You have to go through all this rigmarole. You have to be chained to the desk. They put you in a holding cell. They put you in a gray concrete holding cell by yourself and lock the door where the toilet's out in the open. They they do your fingerprints, they mugshot you, right? And then they try to do a biometric on me at the end where they take your two fingers and they try to put your two fingers on this little machine. And I was like, why do I have to do that? I said, do I have to do that? And they're like, yeah, it's a policy. I'm like, well, can you show me that policy? And we stand there and everybody gets on their computers, you know, whenever Connie says, where's the policy on that? Where's the law on that? Everybody gets over on a computer and somebody may call somebody. Right? And of course, nobody could come up with it. So they didn't make me do it. So then there were certain forms we filled out that the guy was trying to write things on there I disagreed with. I've tried to be as nice as I could to them, but I mean, ultimately he was like, you know, you don't have to agree with what I'm writing down. I'm like, well, you're writing down my personal information and somebody's going to try to make it look like I lied on that document. And so I'm going to write here, no, you know, that I object to that. So, I mean, it's, oh yeah, because I forgot to say, in my motion for a new trial, the county attorney, Lisa Carson, who has been opposite me in a lawsuit, okay? She has been my opponent in a lawsuit, a very serious lawsuit about the conditions of confinement for juveniles, solitary confinement, assaults by employees. She comes in to the hearing on my motion for the new trial and says, and even though the judge has already said this, that I can stay on bond pending appeal, and she files a motion that I am too dangerous to be in the Williamson County Jail.
That's crazy. Oh, I am sorry. Yeah, this is like going back to the witch hunts. What the heck?
I mean, she goes, I have made allegations. She says, Miss Reguli has made allegations that Sheriff Dusty Rhodes has conspired to lock up children to give them vaccines and psychotropic drugs. And I'm listening to her and I'm thinking, I could have said something like that. I mean, that sounds like something I could say because I know what happens when you put incarcerated kids. I know DCS vaccinates children when they pick them up. I know they gave them COVID shots without the permission of their parents. I know it. It's been in the news. Okay. I know that kids are given psychotropic drugs, especially in foster care. I mean, I don't know. I can't say that much in detention, but I know in foster care, they get psychotropic drugs prescribed to them often. So she says that, and then she says, well, Ms. Reguli's made complaints about conditions of confinement that have found to be false by another or in this very circuit. And she said it like really weird. And I was like, why did she say it that way? And then I thought this very Judge Joseph Woodruff, the same one that changed the statute, the same one that signed the search warrant, that he made that comment at some point along the line. So she is there to telegraph his comments to this new judge. Now, this is the same very judge that dismissed 3 counts of felony indictment for rape on my juvenile client. This judge dismissed child rape because allegedly the state didn't bring the charges up quickly enough. Now, these are like Class A felonies, and it was delayed like 1.5 years. It's like, that is not a long time. Here you all are waiting 1 year to charge me with a Class E felony, right? And 1.5 years on a Class A felony is too long. And so you're going to dismiss it. I mean, we are pulling everything that it is crazy. It is so crazy. So then this indictment, it says aggravated perjury. I go through the booking and they don't give me the indictment. They only give me the capias. So I walk out of there and then I walk out with the capias. I ask the ask them for the indictment and they don't have it. So I don't yet have a copy of the indictment. So, I'm not going to try to make any guesses or who, what, when, why. But my very high suspicion is that there still has something to do with these same players, right? It still has something to do with Judge Woodruff and some of the things that he's been involved with, some of the political connections that he's involved with. So now that I am not practicing as much, I have done tons of investigation. I am pulling out background searches on all of these people who are involved. I'm finding connections to them that go back historically. I know that Judge Woodruff came from Waller, which is a huge law firm. I'm drawing the connections, these intense Tennessee political connections. Tennessee has historically had some crazy corruption. We had the Blanton, which was the clemency for cash. We had the Tennessee Waltz, which was a state senator taking bribes. I mean, we had a sheriff in our very own community was involved in selling cocaine. I mean, and I am just very curious of all these because, I started my law career as a district attorney in Davidson County. And so anytime I see some type of conspiracy or some type of criminal, public corruption, I've pulled these things. I mean, I have files and files of things that I've collected over the years.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. So it is, and the timing, they have to, and they watch me on Facebook. So I'm sure they've heard me say things like, now that we're out of the trial level, I'm going to talk freely about what's happening. I'm sure they've heard me say that. They've had to quash that. I'm sure they've heard me say I have, some people I'm going to be training to do political activity and doing lobbying. They've heard me talk about that. They want to discredit me there. They want to, I don't know, maybe they want to try to revoke my bond, but they put me on RR on this bond. So I don't know how you could revoke that. And then let's say they, yeah. So, it's just, it's continuing to, they're continuing to need to be able to make me be quiet. So, and, we just really can't, there's so much going on, and they monetized our children so badly and monetize the courts. And, now that I stand back and I look at the way it operates, I see it so much differently. And it's really it's a very sad situation.
It's everywhere. It's in every courtroom. The same situation happened in Mecklenburg, North Carolina, where a judge recused himself and then went and sat in the back of the courthouse and then made sure the judge was doing her job.
Yep.
Or something to that effect.
Yep. And I know I just saw published, and I did reach out to the girl. I haven't been able to call her yet, but there was an article just last week or the week before where a female attorney in Connecticut got disbarred because she called out the prejudice and the bias of the judges, especially and particularly in the family court system. So, finally some people are speaking up, and I don't know where we end up at the end of the day, but we can't quit because I just see so much aftermath now. I mean, I was in the courtrooms and I walked through the courtrooms for, 30 years. And now I'm seeing the aftermath of that. I'm seeing that, 10 years later, what kind of relationships do these children have with their parents, right? I mean, whether it's a divorce or whether it's a DCS, I mean, what DCS does to children, it totally breaks that ability to bond. And they become so much more mentally displaced. And I've seen it over and over and over. I mean, the one gift you can give your child in the first 18 years of their life are connections, right? Just
Mhm.
good, trusted connections, because you can't teach them everything they need to know by the time they become 18. So you've got to, and I know when my daughters turned 18, I sat them down and I says, look, I just got to tell you, the only thing 18 does for you is bump you up the food chain. And they
Mhm.
didn't understand that, but it wasn't long before they realized, like, oh, there's bills to pay. Oh, I got to feed myself. Oh, mama's not going to be there to cover for me all the time.
Mhm.
So, we've got to give them connections. And we know already that if kids have been in foster care and they've been tossed from home to home to home, they are so much more likely to end up in prison, end up back in the system, you really not have strong jobs, like strong community ties. We already know that. So we know it doesn't work. So, I'm now, but it's become so monetized and such a financial, and it's a financial strain on taxpayers. I mean,
Mhm.
we are doing $1 billion a year just here in Tennessee, and that does not include the adoption entitlement money. And here's the next, and I want to go ahead and talk about this whole next thing that's in the brew here,
Mhm.
which is the illegal immigrants, okay?
Mhm.
Because when Joe Biden outlawed the private prisons, all these private prisons all of a sudden changed their marquee from prison to detention center, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so now, which is so much easier when you think about it, it's so much easier to be a detention center and control your population in your facility than it is prisoners, because prisoners have rights to juries and trials and post convictions reliefs, and they have to be visited by their attorneys, and you have to have visitation hours for families, right? I mean, you have all that you have to deal with. But when you're dealing with illegal immigrants, all
Mhm.
they have to do is be picked up off the street or picked up at the border and put in a van and dropped off at your front door. You don't have to do anything else. I think some of them are given a court date, but it's usually like, 6 months from now or something. And
Mhm.
you don't have to give them visiting hours. You don't have to give them, time to meet with attorneys. And you just, they don't have trials and convictions. It's such easier to do. And I know two of the largest private industry people are Core Civic and GTO. What is it called? GTE, GTO. I forget.
Mhm.
But anyway, one of them does primarily the GPS monitoring, where they put ankle monitors on all these people. And then the other one is the actual incarceration. And both of them are doing about 500 million a year in detention. And they were in the private prison industry. And so then I'm like, okay, well, what about these unaccompanied minors, unaccompanied minors, unaccompanied minors? So I did pull the illegal immigration statistics for, and these are just the ones we catch, right? And just the ones we can count. But in the last 2 years in Tennessee, what are the numbers? I think it's 4,000 children have been brought into the state of Tennessee as unaccompanied minors. That is a lot
Oh,
of children. And
that's so
so
sad.
it is. And that all feeds into this whole foster DCS situation. Some of them go to people who are quote unquote their sponsors, but who's checking that, I
Mhm.
mean, how do you know if they're related or not related, or, maybe they're bought and sold and traded? I mean, like, I don't know. It's hard to tell. They're a commodity. We're all a commodity. And the longer we allow this to go, I mean, they're just going to keep monetizing us.
I don't know how you stop that. You know, it's a train that's going at a fast speed. I don't know how we stop it.
Well, education is huge. Okay. Education and publicity and raising the narrative. We have to raise the narrative. I mean, every single thing that's gone on in this country that has been stopped. And we have a history of some pretty bad civil rights abuses in this country,
Mhm.
and not just slavery. There are other things that are pretty horrific, such as the orphan trains, where they pick
Mhm.
children up off the streets in New York and put them on trains and sent them across the United States and lined them up on train station railway depots and let people come and pick a child or two to go home with them. I mean, siblings were separated. They had no contact. They didn't even know who they were, and they didn't even have birth certificates hardly. So we had the orphan trains. We had the involuntary sterilization that even Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote that, 3 imbeciles is enough, and it's no greater sacrifice than a person who joins the military than to be involuntary sterilized if you can't contribute to society. I'm like, and then, of course, we have the Indian children who were picked up off the reservations, taken to boarding schools in the eastern United States, forced to cut their hair, forced to speak English, forced to dress in, Western clothing. So, we have this history of not very good stuff. And you have to ask yourself, how did those stop? Sometimes when you get overwhelmed, you have to go, how did that stop? Another really good example is in Tennessee, we had Georgia Tan over in West Tennessee. And this was in about I think the 40s and 50s up through the 60s. And she started, and again, somewhat of a good intention that got so perverted, but she started as a home for unwed mothers. And so women would go in, which back then, of course, it was shameful. It was a scarlet letter to have a baby out of wedlock. And so if a young girl got pregnant, she would go to this home for unwed mothers. She had some nurses that came in and out. They'd have a baby, and then she would find a placement for that baby. And it became a business and an industry for her. And I mean, when she couldn't find enough babies and unwed mothers, she literally picked kids up off the street. And she was finally busted by one person. She was busted by this one person who came in and worked for her for a while, and then was able to get that entire story out. So, I mean, we stopped orphan trains because we talked about them, the conversation even about slavery. I mean, it's because it became such a hot political conversation that something had to give on it. And so that's what we have to do. And we have to put in the ear. And I tell people, it's like, don't get distracted with all the chitter chatter, right? Don't get distracted. Don't get distracted with Ukraine. Ukraine's going to lose a war. We're not going to get in it. We've sent them billions of dollars, which we could have used to buy groceries and feed people. They're going to lose. Okay. I feel really bad for those people. Getting some recovery money would probably be better for them, but they're going to lose that war. So, and they've got lots of corruption in that country anyway. So I'm like, don't get distracted by that. They're distracting you while all kinds of other things are happening.
Yeah, they're good at that.
Yeah, they did. They are. I mean, and just like with the Trump and the search warrant this week, it's like, okay, I got it. He is the first one who came out with it and said it. He told everybody. They're just giving him more notoriety, right? I mean, they're just the more people talk about you, the more you become. The more you stand for something, right? I mean, you stand for something. So, I think I have my own opinions. I think there was probably stuff in there that might have been incriminating to somebody else, and they wanted to get it out of his hands. But he's a pretty smart guy. And if he did have that incriminating evidence on other people, I'm sure he has it stored in, lock boxes in 8 different countries, right? I mean, he's not going to rely on just that. So, but it's so distracting, and people just keep talking about the same thing. And I'm like, all while they're like ripping children out of people's homes, and they're okay with that, hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent of our poor hard-earned taxpayer money. I mean, geez, how much more can we take? I mean, they tax us everywhere we turn. They tax our tires, they tax our cell phones, they do our income tax. I mean, it's just everywhere. It's tax. And so because we are taxed so much, I was just looking at the Tennessee budget. It's like $26 billion. It is $1 billion a year for DCS. So we have got to, become voices for the people instead of letting the lobbyists control it, because the lobbyists are absolutely controlling it.
Well, I know parents ask, how do we should go to legislature and, I don't know, give them letters, write to them, call them. but none of that's working.
Well, it's hard to turn the Titanic around. Okay. So, you know, so we have to celebrate our small successes, but we can't believe that any small success is going to be the answer. And so, you know, and I'll give you an example, which in 2015 or 16, I can't remember, is when we first started going to DC, and we went up there several times. And it was a very, honestly, it was a very, I don't know. I mean, it reminded me, honestly, now as I look back, it like reminds me of like the Little Rascals or something, right? Because we're just up there, we got signs, you know, we're like holding them over to the street, you know, honk for kids. I mean, but we've got poster board signs. And I mean, it's, you know, we're ragtagging it, right? We were just a ragtag group of people. And yet we've become better and better. And, you know, we don't have a lot of money from an NGO. We don't have George Soros money to help us do this, or Koch money to help us do this. We are just a grassroots voice of the people. And when I started seeing what needed to be done, I was like, the change is going to come from the heart of America. It is not going to come from DC. And so we have to get into the heart of America and change those hearts and change that information. I mean, there are people now who are getting to see it. And, you know, and and I'm not going to say I made it happen, because they'll turn around and they'll say, Connie Reguli did not make that happen. But our DCS commissioner just recently got fired. She got seated in January 2019. And she had a horrible audit come out in December 2020. We've had several news stories about her, talking about her, and she left her job in July. So now we have somebody else coming in September 1st, but I'm not hopeful, because it's a person who's in law enforcement. It's a person who works with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations. I mean, this is not a job for a policeman, okay? This is a job for somebody who has some organizational skills and knows that you need to be able to take resources and properly allocate them to make some improvement in the system. So when we finally got the Family First Act passed in February 2018, which we had worked for, and somebody slid it in the big omnibus bill, but it got passed. But now the states won't implement it. And there are only 19 states that are implementing it, which is to provide for services prior to removal. And the whole purpose was to say there are a lot of kids taken out of homes for low risk, but they don't get the money unless they take them out of the home. So this will kill the foster care business. I mean, if people will truly implement it and do it correct, it will kill the foster care business. And even now, I will say they're having trouble. You know, they're always advertising for foster homes, always needing more foster homes, because they're trying to snatch so many kids, and they can't. And, you know, some foster parents have been sued. There's been some publicity about foster parents being charged for crimes. So it's not this delightful little position. However, they actually advertise it on websites like Indeed, which is a website to job search. They advertise foster parenting on there. In some states, it's like $96,000 a year is the average income. And I'm sure that's because those people have 3 or 4 or 5 children in their home. So, you know, if we go silent, nothing happens, right? If we go silent, nothing happens. And so we have to keep putting it, because it doesn't work. And so but they have had blinders on, and they pretend it does work. And then they just keep doing the same thing. Total insanity. Just like Albert Einstein said, they keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Total insanity. So the more we point out to their face, it does not work. It does not work. It does not work. It does not work. Here's another failure. Here's another failure. Here's another failure. And we keep exposing it, and keep putting out there what they say. I mean, these courtrooms are like an alternate universe, right? I mean,
Right.
it's like it's like the things that people say in there and the way they try to corner you and trap you. I
Mhm.
mean, just like in my case, the DA, Mary Catherine Evans, was so personally invested and she became so emotionally charged in talking about this. And it's like, you would have thought I killed somebody. She did not support the fact that DCS had done the wrong thing. She did not. So when it was pointed out to her that her witness had lied multiple times, they totally blew it off and ignored it.
Mm.
So it is, but we have to keep it up. We have to keep it up.
And that's just it. We have to keep talking. This is a grassroots movement, and just educating people. People don't realize all of this is going on. All of this court corruption, the CPS corruption. I mean, there are people walking around that actually believe there is no corruption in family court.
Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah. And I've been talking about that since 2008 with eyes wide open, going like, what is going on around here?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you like making people, look like horrible people when you have, I mean, I had one case where, and I respect my past clients' privacy, so I'm kind of careful about it. But I mean, I've been involved in, well over 1,000 cases, and and this dad was a stay-at-home dad while the wife went to medical school. And then when it came time for the divorce after she got out, she totally demonized him. And
Mm-hmm.
here is the man that you trusted your children with,
Mm-hmm.
and he moved all over the country with you while you were trying to get your medical degree. And now you've got the medical degree, you dump him and make him look like a sorry son of a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the father that got your children this far.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it's very troubling that the judges get caught up in that, and they kind of allow that type of narrative to persist and don't really take the time to get a better understanding, and they allow the attorneys to control the attitude, right? The attitude. And so, I was running for juvenile court judge against Judge Sharon Guffey. I think she's a terrible person and a terrible judge. I just think she's terrible. I mean, I've heard the way she talks to people. I heard the way she talked to me several times.
Mm-hmm.
And and I said, it's because I think that, especially in juvenile court, the story is to be told. The story needs to be told, and it needs to be told in such a way that you can identify that avenue, to get a better result than where you are now. But that's not what they think. They want to turn the child as soon as a family walks into a door. And I'm going to tell you, in divorces, as soon as somebody signs up with a divorce attorney, they're calculating how much money they can make off of you. And that is the truth. That is the truth. They already know, they know all your assets. They know how much you have. They know, they can get you charged up to be more aggressive. So they are calculating how much money they can make as soon as you step in that door.
Very true. Very true.
And you say nothing's happened, but I'm telling you what, if they weren't so afraid of my voice, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly, because you're exposing it, and they're trying almost to backpedal to come up with more stuff on you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's just so low budget. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Well, and they're people we pay. They're people
Right.
I've paid a lot of taxes in my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are people that I pay to be public servants over my community. And I have a certain expectation of integrity. And it ain't getting there. We're not there. So if people want to live in that world, they need to realize, I mean, that it's going to escalate further and further down, and you're going to leave that for the generations behind you. And they're going to be totally sucked into the hole and can't do anything. I mean, I'm not a huge history buff, but I do like some, there's some things in history that are very meaningful to me, and especially biblical history. And, you look at Noah and, how things were so bad that God wanted to destroy everybody. And, that didn't happen overnight, right? I mean, there were years and years and decades and probably hundreds of years where humanity declined, and to a point where they just had no morality anymore. And we're at that point. If we don't step up with our very own children and tell them, a drag queen reading and story time to 4 and 5 and 6-year-old children is not a good thing, then it's going to become the norm. And, and I did a lot of my undergraduate in psychology. And when you normalize, I mean, it's so easy to normalize aberrant behavior. I mean, people do it in relationships all the time. And that's why you have all that psychological manipulation, from narcissists, because they want to normalize the abuse. They want to normalize the manipulation so that you think that's your world and that's okay. So we have to say it's not okay. We want, we're not going to put up with that. People are going to get divorced, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, it should not cost them $100,000, their entire reputation, everything they've worked for,
their career,
all their relationships, right? So, when you see that and you realize that 10 years later, those children that you've affected are going to be psychologically damaged because of what you did.
And that in turn will affect 6 more generations to come.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dr. Roseman wrote that in his book, Preserving Family Ties, that this damage will affect 6 generations to come.
And it already, I mean, look back. I mean, we're probably already in about generation 4, actually.
Right.
Because, but it's still getting worse. And so, I mean, we're still not healing it, but, I mean, I've been in it for 3 decades, and, that's at least a generation and a half. So, we're probably well into 2 or 3 generations of the way we have destroyed this. And, but I hear more and more people talking, and they're getting it, and they're understanding it doesn't work. So we just have to keep that in the ear of the people who are legislating. Now, here's the problem with legislation, of course, is because the legislators create laws, and then judges don't follow the law, right? And then judges don't have any accountability to anybody else. And that's kind of what has happened, and where we are in this. So there is absolute, so there's no accountability. They don't follow the law. It's hard. They go in and lobby against our laws. I've gone in and asked for laws, and they've lobbied against them. So they try to demonize the people that they don't want to be the voice of the people. So, so we just have to keep it out there and keep people talking, and invite people and help people to be able to articulate their own stories, because everybody's story is important.
Definitely. And this is why I love having you on.
Oh, thank you.
You tell it like it is, and this is how it is. And, whether people, I know it's an uncomfortable topic people don't want to hear or discuss, but we've got to discuss it because it's affecting our future generations.
Yeah. And I will say, the pandemic was kind of good for our movement in the, from the perspective that it did raise a lot of attention to how they're monetizing our children at a different level. So it drew a lot of perspective to what they wanted to do and control and manipulate our children related to mask wearing, related to this very bizarre environment they wanted to put them in schools with social distancing and screens up around their desk. And I mean, I've got grandchildren in my home who are going to elementary school, and, it was this very bizarre thing. But the one thing about the thing that combated that for us is that we continue to live normally. So that whole experience with school was just such a limited thing that we always sort of looked at as it's just temporary. It's just a temporary thing. So, you're just going to kind of deal with it now, but it'll be temporary, or we'll object to it. So, but that's, and we're not vaccinated, and we didn't wear masks at home. And, so we kept our life, we normalized our life the way we wanted it to. And then that was just kind of a temporary thing that they had to deal with. But people were seeing and starting to raise their voices at school board meetings and looking at what they're doing. And, they want more kids, they want more control over your children. And so parents have got to be willing to stand up for parenting and stand up for, us taking on that responsibility of making our children great, make families great again, make children great again, because they are, they're so valuable, and they're so adorable, and their minds are so great, and, so unadulterated. And we have to just nurse that, right? We just have to take care of that. So, I mean, I really, with Family Forward Project, I mean, I know my spiritual gifts are encouragement and advocacy, and then probably I have to throw persistence in there, even though I don't really consider it at the top of the charts, but it has to be part of it, or I would have quit a long time ago. But, I really encourage parents and families, and I put that out there to all your listeners. It's like, you have a story, and, it may not be a DCS story. It may be a disabled child story. It may be an elder story of elder abuse, or, learn to articulate that story, and learn to who should be hearing it. Who are the people that should be hearing it, and how do you put that out there? And it's a little frightening for people at first. I've interviewed lots of people about, their stories, but your story is so important. I mean, look at what is history. It's his story, right? I mean, it's like, it's just stories. And so we learn from the past because we share that information. And they could not isolate, they couldn't win in the pandemic because we did not let it happen. But what we did do, what we're very, very bad at, is getting distracted. We're very bad at getting distracted with some pop hit news that they then drag out, right? They drag it out for like a week or two before they get another pop hit news. They drag that out, and it's a one topic thing. It's like to grab always like the next newscast is going to tell you something new about it, right? Like Trump and his search warrant, or a school shooting, or, it's like they're trying to snatch us, and we're not paying attention to what's going on around us. So that's my other thing to people. It's just like, please don't get distracted. Please
stay focused.
Please.
Yeah, I try to get people to stay focused. Oh, I'm so glad you came on. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I do just, again, encourage people to get in the Family Forward Project and learn and watch. And even if it hasn't affected you, there's so many families that are telling their story every day. So please, please join us. We do have these two events coming up in Missouri, and then in Springfield, Illinois on the 22nd and 29th. I have some other events that I am working on that are not really public events. And I know there are people who are trying to foil my activities. So I'm not putting out there ahead of time so much, a few things and some traveling that I've got set up. But afterwards, or when I get there, I will for sure, be talking about it. I just don't want to allow people to spoil that in advance. But we are doing so December, not December, September. I'm trying to get a few people. I have about a handful of people that we're going to have at DC to do some training. And gosh, we've got to get back in those buildings. We used to be able to walk in those buildings and knock on doors and just talk to people, and then they took all that away from us. So hopefully we can, those buildings belong to the citizens. So hopefully we can get that back.
Mhm.
But
I
thank you
agree.
very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for what you do. Always a joy
Thank you.
to talk to you. I feel like I dominate the conversation, but so I appreciate what you do and all the efforts that you have made to get that story onto platforms, that we can spread all over the
Mhm.
place. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I let you talk because I don't like to interrupt. I tell people I don't like to interrupt because I don't want to break your train of thought. I hate it when I'm being interviewed and I'm getting interrupted. It's like, where was I?
Right. I know. I know how. Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, so good
Okay.
to talk to you today.
Good to
Thank you
talk to you.
so much.
And I will put the how people can reach you in the podcast notes.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. We'll talk soon. I'll have you back on. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again here with Attorney Connie and other exciting guests. Thank you again.